The grand amphitheater of the Galactic Union Academy could hold 2,000 students at once. It was shaped like a bowl carved from pale crystal, with rows of seats rising up in wide circles toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. The orbital station Velindris Prime hung in deep space between three major trade routes, and every year, the brightest young minds from over 400 worlds came here to learn, to train, and to serve. Today was the first day. Professor Talshevek stood at the center of the floor, his long translucent body catching the light from the display panels behind him. He was a Meyerlian, tall, thin, with bones so delicate that a strong wind on most planets could snap them. But here, in the carefully controlled gravity of the station, he moved with grace. He had taught this opening lecture for 43 years, and he loved every moment of it. "Welcome," he said, his voice amplified by the speakers embedded in every seat, "to Introduction to Xenobiology and Planetary Classification. By the end of this term, you will understand the conditions under which life arises, the boundaries within which it thrives, and the limits beyond which it simply cannot exist." He tapped his datapad, and a holographic chart filled the air above him. It showed a simple scale, planetary classes from 1 to 12, colored in soft greens at the low end and harsh reds at the top. "Let us begin with what we know." He walked the students through the basics. Class 1 through 3 were garden worlds, gentle places with mild weather, soft gravity, and abundant food. Most sapient species in the Union came from these. The audience nodded along comfortably. Many of them had grown up on such worlds. Class 4 through 6 were temperate worlds, a bit rougher. Stronger storms, colder winters, larger predators. Species from these worlds tended to be hardier, more cautious. Still, perfectly manageable. Class 7 through 9 were harsh worlds. Here, Talshevek slowed down. "These worlds test the very boundaries of biological survival," he explained. "Extreme temperatures, toxic atmospheres, predators that can crack armored vehicles. Very few sapient species emerge from harsh worlds, and those that do tend to be heavily adapted, thick skin, redundant organs, chemical resistance." A Keleshan cadet in the front row, massive, armored, built like a walking fortress, sat up a little straighter with pride. His homeworld was a Class 8. Then Talshevek reached the top of the chart. Class 10 through 12 glowed an angry red. "And finally," he said, almost smiling, "we come to the Deathworlds." A few students laughed. The word sounded dramatic, like something from a children's story. Talshevek encouraged the laughter. "Yes, the name is rather theatrical. Deathworlds are planets where, theoretically, every major environmental factor is hostile to complex life. We are talking about extreme gravity, 2, 3, even 4 times what most of you experience on your homeworlds. Tectonic instability so severe that the ground itself rips apart on a regular basis. Weather systems capable of flattening cities. Oceans that crush anything below a certain depth. And perhaps most importantly, biological competition so fierce that every organism is locked in a constant, endless war for survival." He paused for effect. "Now, here is the important part. No sapient species has ever evolved on a death world." He said it with the confidence of someone stating that water was wet. The metabolic cost alone would be prohibitive. A sapient brain requires stability, safety, and consistent nutrition to develop. Deathworlds offer none of these things. They are, in the simplest terms, nature's failed experiments. Planets where life may begin, but where intelligence never takes hold. He looked out at the hall, enjoying the attentive silence. The idea of a Deathworld civilization is, frankly, the stuff of ghost stories. Tales told to frighten larvae at bedtime. You may hear such stories in the lower districts of trade stations, rumors of impossible beings from impossible worlds. I encourage you to treat them as what they are, myths. The hall murmured in agreement. 2,000 students from 200 species, all comfortable in the knowledge that the universe was dangerous, yes, but not that dangerous. Not impossibly dangerous. There were limits, and those limits were well understood. From the very back row, In the highest and most distant seat in the amphitheater, a hand went up. It was a small hand, 5 fingers, blunt nails, warm brown skin. Talshevek almost missed it. The back rows were usually empty. Most students preferred to sit closer to the display. But someone was up there, half hidden in the dim lighting, wearing a Union Cadet uniform that didn't quite fit right. "Yes," he said, mildly curious, "you have a question." The figure stood. She was short by galactic standards, barely average even among the smallest species present. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, brown eyes, and a steady expression that was hard to read. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look aggressive. She just looked calm. "Respectfully, Professor," she said, and her voice carried clearly across the silent hall, "my homeworld is classified 12.4. The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of an engaged audience. It was the silence of 2,000 beings who had just heard something that did not fit inside their understanding of reality. Talshevek blinked. His inner eyelids flickered, a Meyerlian sign of deep confusion. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "My homeworld," she said again simply. "Earth. It is classified 12.4 on the Union Planetary Index. I checked before I came here." 2,000 heads turned. Every eye, every sensor, every electromagnetic receptor in the amphitheater focused on the small figure in the back row. Talshevek looked down at his datapad. His fingers trembled slightly as he searched. Earth, Earth. There it was, a file he had never opened, buried in the index under a stack of hazard warnings. 7 separate flags: extreme gravity, biological hazard, atmospheric instability, tectonic activity, predator saturation, uncontrolled microbial evolution. And one final flag he had never seen on any other file: dominant species, apex predator. He stared at the screen, then he looked back up at the girl. She was still standing there, hands clasped in front of her, looking faintly embarrassed by all the attention. She hadn't meant to cause a scene. She had only answered a question. Around her, cadets were pressing themselves into their seats, leaning away, whispering in languages that the translation system struggled to keep up with. A Tessarine student 3 rows below her had gone completely rigid, her 6 limbs locked in a fear response. A Pilvani cadet was quietly clicking a distress signal to his nestmate. Asha Reeves, 22 years old, born in a city called Nairobi on a planet called Earth, the first and only human ever admitted to the Galactic Union Academy through a cultural exchange program that most administrators considered a clerical error, looked out at the hall full of frightened aliens and felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had been here for 6 hours. She had already made everything worse. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Did I say something wrong?" Nobody answered. The amphitheater remained frozen. Talshevek's datapad slipped from his fingers and clattered on the crystal floor, and the sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Somewhere in the middle rows, a cadet fainted. Asha sat back down, very slowly, and wished she had kept her hand to herself. The days after the lecture were not kind to Asha Reeves. The news spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. A Deathworlder, a real one, walking their corridors, sitting in their classrooms, breathing their air. Within 48 hours, every cadet on Velendris Prime knew her name, her species, and the number that haunted them all: 12.4. Ashan noticed the fear immediately. It was impossible to miss. When she walked down a corridor, other cadets pressed themselves flat against the walls. When she entered the dining hall, conversation stopped. When she reached for a door handle, anyone standing nearby would step back, as if she might rip it off the frame. On her 3rd day, she did exactly that. She had been running late for an astrophysics seminar. She grabbed the handle of the classroom door and pulled, and the metal crumpled in her hand like soft clay. The door came free from one of its hinges and swung sideways with a groan. Asha stood there, holding a crushed piece of metal, staring at it in horror. 26 students inside the classroom stared back. "Sorry," Asha whispered. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." She spent the next hour in the maintenance office. filling out a damage report while a repair drone fixed the door. The maintenance chief, an old Dothuri with 6 eyes and no patience, told her it was the 3rd handle she had broken that week. He suggested she start using the automatic doors instead. The problem was gravity. Velindris Prime ran at 0.4 standard, comfortable for the vast majority of Union species, who came from light-gravity garden worlds. Asha came from a planet with more than twice that pull. Every step she took here felt like walking on a trampoline. Every object she touched felt like it was made of paper. She had to concentrate constantly, measuring every movement, every grip, every gesture, reminding herself that the world around her was fragile in ways she had never experienced before. It was exhausting, and it was lonely. Most cadets avoided her entirely. The braver ones watched from a distance, whispering to each other. Asha caught fragments of their conversations through the translation system: persistence predator, endurance hunter, toxic atmosphere breather. One rumor claimed that humans consume the flesh of other living creatures. This was, unfortunately, true. When a Tessarine cadet asked Asha about it directly, trembling with terror, Asha tried to explain the concept of cooking and seasoning. The Tessarine fainted. After that, Asha started eating alone. She found a small observation deck on the station's lower ring, far from the busy corridors, where she could sit by the viewport and watch the stars while she ate her ration packs. The Union food was bland and strange, engineered to be safe for 100 different biologies, but she ate it without complaint. She was used to adapting. The loneliness, though, was harder to swallow. Asha had grown up in a loud, crowded family. She had 4 siblings, a grandmother who cooked for the entire neighborhood, and a mother who believed that no problem on Earth or off it could survive a proper cup of tea and a long conversation. Asha had joined the exchange program because she wanted to see the stars, to represent humanity, to prove that her species belonged out here. She had not expected to become the thing that everyone else was afraid of. She studied harder than anyone. She had to. Humanity had only made first contact with the Union 8 years ago. Asha's knowledge of galactic law, interstellar navigation, and Union history was built from crash courses and late nights, not the lifetimes of cultural immersion that her classmates carried. She was behind, and she knew it. So she sat in the observation deck every night, reading until the station dimmed its lights for the sleep cycle, and then she read some more. It was during one of these late nights that she met Riavik. Riavik was a Tessarine, small, 6-limbed, covered in soft blue-gray fur, with large dark eyes built for spotting predators on her homeworld's open plains. Her planet, Tessara, was a Class 2 garden world, one of the gentlest in the Union. Her people were herbivores, pack-bonded, and deeply communal. Riavik had come to the academy because her family had a long tradition of service, and she was determined to honor it, even though she was terrified of almost everything. Being assigned as Asha's lab partner had nearly caused her to withdraw from the program. But Riavik was also, despite her fear, deeply curious. And after 2 weeks of watching Asha from the far end of their shared lab table, she had noticed something that confused her. The Deathworlder was gentle. Not weak, never weak. Riavik had seen Asha catch a falling centrifuge unit during a lab session, a machine that weighed as much as 3 Tessarines, and set it back upright with one hand without pausing her notes. The strength was real and undeniable. But so was the care. Asha moved through the academy like someone walking through a room full of glass sculptures. She opened doors slowly. She spoke softly. She kept her distance from smaller species, always giving them space, always making herself smaller than she was. And she remembered names, every single name. In a station with thousands of cadets from hundreds of worlds, Asha Reeves knew what to call every person she had ever spoken to, and she said each name carefully, learning the correct pronunciation, practicing it under her breath until she got it right. Riavik found this deeply confusing. Predators, in her understanding, did not bother to learn the names of things smaller than themselves. One evening she gathered her courage and approached the observation deck. She found Asha sitting cross-legged on the floor, a datapad balanced on her knee, a half-eaten ration bar beside her. The human looked up, surprised, and then, before Riovic could speak, her face broke into a wide, warm smile. "Riovic," she said, as if seeing an old friend. "Do you want to sit down? I was just going over the quantum mechanics assignment. I don't understand any of it." Riovic stood in the doorway for a long moment, every instinct in her herbivore brain screaming at her to run from the apex predator that was smiling at her with far too many teeth. Then she walked in and sat down, keeping a careful distance. "I am good at quantum mechanics," Riovic said quietly. "I could help." Ashaz's smile grew even wider. "Really? That would be amazing, thank you." They studied together for 3 hours. At the end of it, Riovic realized with some surprise that she had not been afraid for most of the evening. She had been too busy explaining wave-particle duality to a creature that could bench press a cargo loader. 2 weeks later, the Academy ran its first emergency drill of the term. A simulated hull breach, loss of atmosphere in Section 14. Alarms screamed. Emergency lights flashed red. Cadets were trained to proceed calmly to the nearest shelter pod, seal the door, and wait for the all-clear. Ashad did not go to a shelter pod. Riovic watched in frozen disbelief as her lab partner turned and ran, not away from the breach, but directly toward it. She moved fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move in low gravity, her boots barely touching the floor. She was heading for Section 14, where the alarms were loudest. A drill instructor intercepted her at the corridor junction. "Cadet, shelter pods are the other direction." Ashaz stopped, breathing hard, confusion plain on her face. "But the breach is that way. There might be people trapped." "It is a drill, Cadet. There is no one trapped." "But if it weren't a drill, you would still go to the shelter pod. That is the protocol." Ashaz stared at him. She genuinely did not understand. "Where I come from," she said slowly, "you run toward the danger, that's the whole point. You don't leave people behind." The instructor, a Velathi officer with 30 years of service, had no idea what to say. He filed a report. The report was flagged. 14 different departments read it. None of them knew what to do with a cadet whose first instinct in an emergency was to run toward the problem. That evening, Professor Talshevek sat in his private office and formally requested Ashaz's full planetary file from Union Intelligence. It arrived 2 days later, 11,000 pages of environmental data, biological surveys, and cultural analysis, compiled by a team that had clearly been both fascinated and disturbed by what they found. He started reading on a Tuesday evening. He did not sleep on Tuesday night. He did not sleep on Wednesday night. By Thursday morning, he had reached the section on something called war, a concept so extreme that the Union had no direct translation for it, and he had to stop and sit in the dark for a very long time. In the observation deck, Asha Reeves sat with Riovic and helped her study for a history exam. She quizzed her on trade route treaties and laughed when Riovic got them mixed up. She shared her ration bar. She had no idea that anyone was reading about her world, or that the things she considered normal were keeping a professor awake for 3 days straight. To Asha, this was all just life. She didn't know it was supposed to be impossible. The Academy's annual survival evaluation was the most feared event on the academic calendar. Every first-year cadet knew about it. Every first-year cadet dreaded it. And every year, without fail, at least a quarter of the squads tapped out before the 72 hours were finished. The rules were simple. Squads of 5 were dropped into a simulated hostile environment this year, a Class 7 harsh world, and given a single objective: reach the extraction point alive. No weapons. No communication with the outside. No rescue unless a cadet triggered their emergency beacon, which meant automatic failure for the entire squad. Ashaz's squad assignment had been the subject of significant debate among the Academy's administrators. Nobody wanted a Deathworlder on their team. Nobody wanted to be responsible for what might happen if she was left off a team either. In the end, they placed her with 4 cadets who, for various reasons, had not been claimed by anyone else. Riavik was the first. She had specifically requested to stay with Asha, which surprised everyone except the two of them. The second was Dorvan, a Keleshan, massive and armored, with a warrior caste's pride and a warrior caste's temper. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in interlocking plates of natural bone armor that could deflect small arms fire. His homeworld was a Class 8, which made him one of the toughest beings in the academy. He resented Asha on principle. He had spent his entire life being the hardest thing in any room, and the idea that a soft-skinned, endoskeletal creature from a planet 5 classifications above his own could outperform him was an insult he carried like a stone in his gut. The third was Yen 3, a synthetic from a hive mind collective called the Yenic Convergence. Yen 3 had no biological body. They inhabited a sleek, silver-gray chassis equipped with dozens of sensors, and they processed information faster than any organic mind in the squad. They were calm, analytical, and found Asha statistically interesting, which was the closest thing to enthusiasm their species expressed. The fourth was Pilvith, an Urishan amphibious, with moist blue-green skin and wide, frightened eyes. He was the youngest cadet in the entire cohort, barely past the age of maturity on his homeworld. He had a gentle soul and a tendency to panic, and he had been placed on this squad because no other squad leader wanted someone they considered a liability. Asha looked at her team, the nervous herbivore, the angry warrior, the machine, and the frightened child, and felt something warm settle in her chest. She knew what it was like to be the one nobody wanted. "All right," she said, as the drop pod's countdown began. "We're going to be fine." Dorvan snorted. "Do not presume to lead, human." Asha looked at him calmly. "I'm not presuming anything. I'm just saying we'll be fine." The pod doors opened, and the Class 7 world swallowed them whole. It was immediately violently hostile. The sky was a bruised yellow-gray, heavy with clouds that crackled with static discharge. The air was thick and acidic, not enough to kill, but enough to sting exposed skin and corrode sensitive equipment within hours. The ground was uneven, riddled with cracks and sinkholes, and the temperature was already dropping fast. By nightfall, it would be cold enough to kill any unprotected organism from a garden world. Riavik's fur stood on end the moment she stepped outside. Pilvith's skin was already drying in the acid-tinged air. Dorvan activated his armor's sealed mode, which would protect him but drain his energy faster. Yen 3 ran a quick environmental scan and announced, in their flat mechanical voice, "Conditions are within survivable parameters for all squad members, but margins are narrow. I recommend we move quickly." Asha stood still for a moment. She closed her eyes. She breathed in through her nose, tasting the air the way her ancestors had tasted the wind on the savannas of East Africa 100,000 years ago. "Rain is coming," she said. "Acid rain heavy maybe 2 hours out. We need shelter before then. There's a rock formation about 3 kilometers northeast. I can see the ridge line from here. We move there first, set up a base, then plan our route to extraction." Everyone stared at her. "How do you know that?" Riavik asked. Asha shrugged. "The clouds, the wind direction, the way the air smells. I don't know, it's just weather." They moved. Asha set the pace fast for the others, easy for her. She put Dorvan at the front because his armor could handle anything they might walk into. She asked Yen 3 to map the terrain in real time and flag unstable ground. She walked beside Pilvith, whose amphibious skin was already cracking in the dry heat, and quietly adjusted their route to follow a gully where moisture collected in the soil. "Stay near the low ground," she told him. "It's more humid here, should help your skin." Pilvith looked up at her with enormous, grateful eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. They reached the rock formation just as the first drops of acid rain began to fall. Asha had already identified an overhang deep enough to shelter all 5 of them. She used a broken slab of stone and strips of fibrous plant material to construct a windbreak, working with her hands in a way that seemed so natural it was almost unconscious. Riavik watched her weave the plant fibers and realized, with a strange jolt, that she was watching a predator build a nest. Night fell hard. The temperature plummeted. Asha assigned watches, Yen 3 first, since they didn't need sleep, then Dorvan, who ran cold and would benefit from staying active. She wrapped Pilvith in a thermal layer from the emergency kit and gave Riavik her own outer jacket. "Won't you be cold?" Riavik asked. "I'll be fine," Asha said. "Humans regulate temperature internally. It's not comfortable, but I won't die." "What temperature would kill you?" Asha thought about it. "Depends on the situation. We can survive pretty extreme cold if we keep moving. Our bodies shiver to generate heat. It's involuntary, we can't stop it. And if things get really bad, our extremities shut down blood flow to keep the core organs alive." Riavik stared at her. "Your body sacrifices parts of itself to keep the rest alive." "Yeah, fingers and toes first. We can lose those and survive." Riavik did not sleep well that night. The second day brought the Predator. It came in the late afternoon, a simulated Class 7 megafauna analog, a massive quadruped with armored plating, chemical sensing organs, and jaws designed to crush stone. It was part of the test. The Academy's protocols were clear. The Predator was to be avoided, not engaged. Squads were expected to hide, reroute, or wait it out. The creature found them anyway. It came through the gully at speed, drawn by Pilvith's scent. His amphibious biology made him the most detectable member of the squad. Dorvan stepped forward immediately, placing his armored body between the Predator and the others. He was brave. He was strong. But the creature was 3 times his mass, and when it charged, it hit him like a freight train and pinned him to the ground, its jaws closing on his shoulder plate with a sound like cracking thunder. Dorvan roared. His armor held, but barely. He couldn't move. Asha didn't think. She didn't plan. Something very old and very deep inside her simply switched on. She grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a stone the size of her torso, and charged. The sound she made was not a scream. It was not a battle cry. It was something lower, something raw, something that came from the diaphragm and the back of the throat, a sound that 200,000 years of evolution had designed for one specific purpose: to tell every living thing within earshot that something terrible was coming, and it was not going to stop. Riavik would later describe it as the most terrifying sound I have ever heard a living being make. The Predator hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Asha brought the stone down on the joint of its foreleg. It bellowed and released Dorvan. She hit it again. And again. She was screaming now, not with rage but with purpose, driving the creature back step by step, making herself as loud and as large and as dangerous as she could. The Predator, a simulated beast designed to test the limits of trained military cadets, turned and ran. Asha stood in the gully, chest heaving, stone still raised, and watched it disappear into the haze. Then she dropped the stone, turned around, and knelt beside Dorvan. "Are you hurt? Can you move your arm?" Dorvan stared up at her. His shoulder plate was cracked. His pride was cracked worse. A human, a creature half his size, with no armor, no claws, no venom, had just driven off a Class 7 apex predator with a rock and a scream. "I am functional," he said stiffly. Asha helped him up. She checked Pilvith, who was hyperventilating, and talked him through slow breathing until he calmed down. She checked Riavik, who was shaking but unhurt. She checked Yen 3, who reported no damage but noted that their audio sensors had registered Asha's vocalization at a decibel level usually associated with industrial equipment. They reached the extraction point 18 hours later, the fastest completion time in the Academy's recorded history. When the evaluation officers debriefed the squad, they asked Asha how she had managed the trial. She thought about it for a moment and said, "Honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was like camping, rough camping, but still." The officers exchanged glances. On a Class 7 world that had defeated 2/3 of the other squads, the Deathworlder had gone camping. That evening, as the squad gathered in the recovery bay, Dorvan approached Asha. He did not speak at first. He stood before her, towering, armored, scarred from a life of proving himself the strongest, and he lowered his great plated head in a gesture that, among Kelashans, was reserved for those who had earned the deepest respect. "You are not what I was told you would be," he said quietly. Asha looked up at him and smiled. She reached into her pocket and held out half of a ration bar. "Want some? You earned it." Dorvan took it. He ate it. It was terrible. He had never tasted anything better. 6 months into the academic year, Asha Reeves had become the most talked-about cadet in the history of the Galactic Union Academy. Not because she wanted to be. She would have preferred to be invisible. But a Deathworlder walking through the halls of an institution built for species who considered a stiff breeze to be hazardous weather was never going to go unnoticed. She had changed, though, not in the ways the galaxy expected. Her grades had climbed steadily. She was still behind in some areas. Galactic law was a maze of 10,000 years of treaties she had never heard of, and Union history was so vast it made her head spin. But she attacked every subject with a stubbornness that her professors had begun to recognize as something uniquely human. She did not give up. She did not slow down. She studied until the lights dimmed, and then she studied by the glow of her datapad. Ryavik helped her with quantum mechanics. Yen 3 helped her with systems theory. In return, Asha helped them both with things no textbook could teach: how to read a room, how to keep calm when everything was falling apart, and how to make decisions when the data was incomplete and people were counting on you. She had friends now, real ones. Ryavik had become her closest companion. The small Tessarine who had once been terrified of her now sat beside her in every class, walked with her through every corridor, and defended her to anyone who still whispered about the Deathworlder behind her back. Ryavik had discovered that loyalty, once given, was not something she could take back, and she had given it to Asha completely. Dorvan had become her sparring partner. The Kelashan warrior met her in the training ring 3 times a week, and 3 times a week he lost. He was stronger in raw terms. His armored body could absorb blows that would shatter Asha's bones, but she was faster, more creative, and absolutely relentless. She found angles he didn't expect. She used his own weight against him, and when he knocked her down, she got up. Every single time. Dorvan had stopped being angry about it. He had started to respect it. Then he had started to enjoy it. Then, though he would never admit it aloud, he had started to look forward to it. Pilvath followed Asha everywhere. The young Orishan had imprinted on her in the way his species imprinted on protectors, a deep, instinctive bond that meant he trusted her with his life. Asha, for her part, treated him with the kind of gentle patience that baffled everyone who still thought of her as a predator. She helped him with his coursework. She reminded him to hydrate his skin. She told him he was brave, and she said it in a way that made him believe it. Yen 3 observed all of this and found it statistically fascinating. They had compiled a running analysis of Asha's behavior patterns and had reached a conclusion that they shared one evening in the observation deck. You do not behave like a predator, Cadet Reeves. You behave like a pack-bonding social species that has mistakenly been classified as an apex predator. Asha had laughed at that. We're both, actually. That's kind of the whole deal with humans. And then there was Professor Talshevek. The Meyerlian scholar had not been the same since reading Earth's file. He had spent months researching, cross-referencing, and confirming, and the deeper he went, the more troubled he became, not because the information was wrong, but because it was all terrifyingly true. He had become, almost by accident, the galaxy's foremost expert on human biology, history, and culture, and the knowledge sat inside him like a swallowed star. He had requested a special lecture slot. The Academy had granted it. And now, on a cold station morning 6 months into the year, the grand amphitheater was full again, fuller than it had been on the first day, because word had spread about what the professor was going to discuss. Earth. Talshevek stood at the center of the floor, looking older than he had 6 months ago. He began quietly. I owe you an apology, he said. At the start of this year, I told you that Deathworld civilizations were myths. I was wrong. I was not lying, I simply did not know. None of us did. But ignorance is not the same as truth, and it is time to correct the record. He tapped his datapad. A holographic image of Earth appeared above him, a blue-green sphere streaked with white clouds, beautiful and bright and deceptively peaceful. "This is Earth," he said. "Class 12.4, homeworld of Cadet Asha Reeves. What I am about to tell you is not exaggeration. Every fact has been verified by Union survey teams. I ask that you remain in your seats." He began with the basics. Earth's gravity was 2.3 times the Union standard. Its atmosphere was 21% oxygen, a gas so reactive that most Union species treated it as an industrial hazard. Humans breathed it constantly. They required it to live. Their blood carried it through their bodies using iron, a metal bonded to organic molecules. Their blood was, in a very real chemical sense, rust-powered. A murmur ran through the hall. He moved to the planet itself. Earth had plate tectonics. The ground was not solid. It was broken into massive floating pieces that moved, collided, and tore apart. The result was earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis, waves of water tall enough to swallow cities. These events happened regularly. Humans built their cities anyway. "They do not avoid the danger zones," Talshevek said, his voice thin with disbelief. "They build directly on top of them. One of their largest cultural centers sits on an active fault line. They know it will be destroyed. They have calculated the probability. They live there regardless." He moved to seasons. Earth's axial tilt meant that the climate changed drastically multiple times per year. In some regions, temperatures swung from 60 degrees below freezing to 50 above. Water fell from the sky as rain, as ice, as snow. The wind could reach speeds that would classify as a weapon on most Union worlds, and humans simply adapted. They changed their clothing, their food, their behavior, their very daily patterns every few months for their entire lives. "They do not migrate to safer regions," Talshevek said. "They stay, they endure, they call it weather, and they complain about it casually." He moved to biology. Humans healed. Broken bones knitted back together. Torn skin closed and sealed itself. Damaged organs could sometimes repair on their own. If the damage was severe enough, humans had learned to cut each other open, remove the broken parts, and replace them, sometimes with parts from other humans, sometimes with machines. They called this surgery, and they performed it while the patient was still alive, kept unconscious by carefully administered chemical compounds. Several cadets in the front rows had gone very pale. Then he reached the part that silenced the hall entirely. "Humans," Talshevek said, "are persistence predators." He explained. On Earth, humans were not the fastest creatures, they were not the strongest. They did not have claws or fangs or venom or armor. What they had was endurance. A human could pursue prey across open ground for hours, not outrunning it, but simply following at a steady pace, never stopping, never tiring, while the prey ran itself to exhaustion, to heat stroke, to collapse. The prey would sprint and rest, sprint and rest. And every time it stopped to gasp for breath, the human would appear on the horizon, still coming, still walking, still patient. The human never stopped. The hall was silent. Riavik, sitting beside Asha in the back row, turned to look at her friend. Asha was staring at her own hands, her expression unreadable. "You never told me any of this," Riavik whispered. Asha didn't look up. "You never asked, and anyway it's just normal to us." The final piece of information Talshevek shared was the one that emptied 6 seats, as cadets quietly excused themselves from the hall. Adrenaline, a chemical compound produced naturally in the human body during moments of extreme stress. When activated, it increased heart rate, sharpened senses, dulled pain, and temporarily boosted strength and speed beyond baseline levels. It was, in effect, an emergency combat drug built into their biology, triggered automatically, requiring no technology and no preparation. "They do not choose to activate it," Talshevek said. "It activates itself. Their bodies are designed to become more dangerous when they are threatened, and the effects are immediate." He paused. He looked very tired. "There is one more thing. Humans have been observed continuing to fight, continuing to move, to act, to protect others after sustaining injuries that would be immediately fatal to most sapient species. Broken limbs, punctured organs, massive blood loss. They do not stop. Their bodies refuse to stop. The literature uses a phrase I do not fully understand but which I will share with you regardless. He looked toward the back of the hall, where Asha sat small and quiet and human. The phrase is, too stubborn to die. The lecture ended in silence. No one moved for a long time. That night the galaxy shifted, not with a battle or a declaration, but with a slow, creeping understanding that moved through the academy like cold water through cracks in stone. The ghost stories were not stories. The myths were not myths. And the small, kind, ration bar-sharing cadet in the back row was made of something the galaxy had never encountered before. 3 days later, the Vreth Dominion attacked. The alarms hit Velendris Prime at 3:47 station time, tearing through the sleep cycle like a blade through silk. Red lights, screaming sirens, the bone-deep vibration of weapons fire hitting the outer hull. A raiding fleet from the galactic rim had dropped out of faster-than-light travel dangerously close to the station and launched a surgical strike against the outer ring. Breaching pods slammed into the hull. Boarding parties poured through the gaps. Vreth soldiers, tall and chitinous, bred for exactly this kind of violence. Cadets scrambled for shelters. The corridors filled with panic, hundreds of young beings from gentle worlds, trained for careers, not combat, running from a sound most of them had only heard in simulations. Asha stood in the corridor outside her quarters. She was already dressed. She had woken the moment the first impact shook the station. Her body had reacted before her mind had caught up, adrenaline flooding her system, heart rate spiking, senses sharpening. She could hear the weapon fire. She could hear the screaming. And beneath it all, coming from the breached sections 3 corridors away, she could hear the low clicking communication of Vreth soldiers moving in formation. Ryevik grabbed her arm. Asha, shelter now. Asha looked down at her friend. Then she looked toward the sound of the fighting. She could hear people crying out for help in that direction. Wounded cadets, trapped staff, people who could not defend themselves. She thought about the emergency drill months ago. She thought about the instructor who had told her the protocol was to hide. She thought about her answer, the one she still believed with every cell in her body. You don't leave people behind. You go to the shelter, Asha said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not shaking. Her eyes had changed. Something behind them had gone very still and very focused, like a lens clicking into place. Take Pilvith. Find Yen 3. Get somewhere safe. Asha, no. Ryevik. Asha put both hands on the Tessarine's narrow shoulders, gently, carefully, the way she always touched her smaller friends. I'll be okay, I promise. Go. She turned and she ran toward the fire. Ryevik stood in the corridor, shaking, watching the Deathworlder disappear into the red-lit darkness, and understood for the first time what Talshevek had been trying to tell them. The ghost stories were not warnings about what Deathworlders would do to you. They were warnings about what Deathworlders would do for you. The outer ring of Velendris Prime was burning. Not with open flame, the station's suppression systems had handled that, but with the slower, uglier kind of destruction that came from breaching pods, weapon fire, and the methodical violence of soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. Emergency lighting cast everything in a deep red glow. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp chemical smell of ruptured conduits. Somewhere ahead, behind sealed bulkheads and collapsed ceiling panels, people were screaming. Asha Reeves moved through the wreckage like she had been born to it. She was not armed. Cadets did not carry weapons, so she armed herself as she went. A metal support strut, ripped loose from a damaged wall frame, became a club. A maintenance toolkit found in a storage alcove gave her a pry bar and a cutting torch. A fire suppression canister, pulled from a wall mount and modified with 30 seconds of quick work, became something that would produce a blinding flash and a deafening bang when triggered. It was crude. It was improvised. It was exactly what 200,000 years of tool-making instinct had prepared her for. She was bleeding. A piece of shrapnel from the initial hull breach had caught her left arm, opening a long cut from elbow to wrist. It hurt. She noticed it, filed it away, and kept moving. Her body had already begun to clot the wound, red blood cells rushing to the site, platelets forming a seal, the ancient machinery of human survival doing what it had always done. She would deal with it later. There were people ahead who needed her more than she needed stitches. She was halfway to the medical wing, where her internal map of the station told her the heaviest concentration of wounded would be, when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, fast, and armored. She spun, raising the metal strut, and found Dorvan. The Kelashan warrior was fully sealed in his natural armor, his massive frame filling the corridor. Behind him, moving fast on 6 trembling legs, was Riavik. Behind her, the silver-gray chassis of Yen 3 hummed with active sensors, and clinging to Yen 3's back, wide-eyed and terrified but present, was Pilvith. Asha stared at them. "I told you to go to the shelter," she said. Dorvan's armored face was unreadable, but his voice was not. "You did not think we would let you go alone." Riavik stepped forward. Her fur was bristled flat with fear, but her voice was steady. "You said you don't leave people behind. Neither do we, not anymore." Something hot and tight rose in Asha's chest. Her eyes stung. She blinked it back hard because there was no time for that now. "Okay," she said, and then she smiled a fierce, bright human smile and started talking fast. The plan was simple because simple plans survived contact with reality. Dorvan would take point. His armor could absorb Vreth weapon fire longer than anyone else. Yen 3 would provide sensor coverage, mapping enemy positions through walls and relaying them to the squad in real time. Riavik would work communications. If she could access a terminal, she could patch into the Vreth communication frequency and feed their positions to station security. Pilvith would handle the wounded, move them to cover, stabilize them, keep them alive. He was scared, but his amphibious biology gave him a natural steadiness with delicate work, and Asha had seen him handle injured lab specimens with hands that never shook. Asha would go first. They reached the medical wing in 4 minutes. The corridor outside was littered with debris and the unconscious bodies of station security officers who had tried to hold the line and failed. Through the sealed door, Yen 3's sensors counted 12 Vreth soldiers inside, along with approximately 40 hostages, wounded cadets, medical staff, civilian workers. 12 trained soldiers, armed, armored, and positioned behind cover. Asha had a metal bar, a homemade flashbang, and 4 friends. "This is insane," Riavik whispered. "Probably," Asha agreed. She looked at each of them in turn. Dorvan, who had bowed his head to her in respect. Riavik, who had sat beside her when no one else would. Yen 3, who had analyzed her and found something worth calculating. Pilvith, who had trusted her with everything he had. "Stay behind Dorvan until I clear the first group. Riavik, get to the comm terminal on the left wall. I saw one on the station blueprints. Pilvith, once the shooting starts, get to the hostages and start moving them toward the back exit. Yen 3, keep counting. Tell me where they are." "And you?" Dorvan asked. Asha tightened her grip on the metal strut. "I'll be loud." She triggered the improvised flashbang and threw it through the door the moment Dorvan forced it open. The canister detonated with a crack that rattled the walls, a burst of white light and compressed air that sent the nearest Vreth soldiers staggering, their sensitive antenna rays overloaded. In the half-second of chaos that followed, Asha was already inside. She moved like nothing the Vreth had ever fought. She was too fast for a creature her size, too aggressive for something unarmored, and far, far too willing to close the distance. She hit the first soldier across the knee joint, the one gap in Vreth chitin armor, and he went down screaming. She rolled under the weapon fire of the second and drove the pry bar into the hydraulic joint of his arm. The metal bar came back bloody. She kept moving. The Vreth were elite raiders. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They had never encountered anything like this, a single organic creature, bleeding, unarmored, and utterly unwilling to stop. Their training told them that unarmored targets went down when hit. Asha went down twice and got up both times. Their training told them that pain caused retreat. Asha was in pain and coming closer. Their training had no protocol for a species that treated mortal danger as motivation. Dorvan crashed through behind her like a living battering ram, his massive body absorbing fire meant for the hostages. He shielded a cluster of wounded cadets with his own frame, taking hits that cracked his outer armor but never reaching the people behind him. Rjavik made it to the comm terminal. Her 6 hands flew across the interface, faster than any human or Vreth could manage, cracking the enemy communication encryption in under a minute. She fed every Vreth position on the station directly to Union security forces. The tide of the wider battle began to turn. Pilvith was in the middle of the hostages, exactly where Asha had placed him. His wide, wet hands, designed for gripping slippery surfaces in deep water, were perfect for applying pressure bandages, holding together torn skin and steadying shaking bodies. He was crying the entire time. He did not stop working. Yen 3 stood at the doorway and counted. 4 remaining, 2 behind the surgical bay, 1 on the upper level, 1. "Where's the last one?" Asha called. Directly ahead, 3 meters, the commander. The Vreth commander was the largest of them, a veteran, scarred from campaigns across a dozen star systems, with reinforced chitin plating and a personal energy weapon that hummed with a charge designed to cut through ship hulls. He looked at Asha across the ruined medical wing. He saw a small creature, half his height, covered in blood, some of it her own, some of it his soldiers holding a bent metal bar, breathing hard, standing between him and 40 defenseless hostages. He struck her. The blow caught her across the ribs with the force of an industrial press. She heard them crack 2, maybe 3, and the pain was white and total and everywhere. She hit the ground. The metal bar skidded away from her fingers. The commander turned toward the hostages. Asha reached for the bar. Her hand closed around it. Her broken ribs screamed. Her vision blurred at the edges. The adrenaline was still pouring through her, keeping the pain at a distance, keeping her muscles firing, keeping the ancient machinery of survival running at full capacity. She stood up. The commander turned back. He stared. She was standing. She was broken, bleeding from half a dozen wounds, her left arm barely functional, 3 ribs cracked, a burn across her shoulder where his weapon had grazed her, and she was standing. More than that. She was smiling. Not with cruelty, not with madness, with the quiet, exhausted, unbreakable certainty of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history being knocked down and getting back up. 200,000 years of ice ages and plagues and predators and famines and wars and disasters, and the one thing that had never changed, the one thing that defined her kind more than any other trait, was this: they refused to stay down. The commander hesitated. For the first time in his career, he felt something he did not recognize. It was fear. Asha closed the distance. The fight was short. When it was over, the commander was on the floor, disarmed, alive, because Asha did not kill when she did not have to, and the medical wing was secure. Union Special Forces arrived 11 minutes later. They breached the door with tactical precision, weapons raised, ready for a firefight, and found it already finished. They found Dorvan standing over the hostages, his armor cracked in 19 places, still on his feet. They found Rjavik at the comm terminal, still feeding data to command, her 6 hands still moving. They found Yen 3 standing watch at the door, calmly cataloging enemy weapons for the security report. They found Pilvith covered in other people's blood, still bandaging wounds, still crying, still working. And they found Asha Reeves sitting against the far wall with 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, second-degree burns, multiple lacerations, and a face so covered in blood that her smile was the only thing visible. Sitting next to the Vreth commander she had just defeated and offering him her water canteen. "He looked thirsty," she said, when the Special Forces team stared at her. The story spread. It could not be contained. Security footage from the medical wing was transmitted across the station, then to the fleet, then to every news network in the Union. The galaxy watched a 22-year-old human woman charge an armed invasion force with a metal pipe, a homemade flashbang, and 4 friends. They watched her break and bleed and burn. They watched her get back up. They watched her win. And they watched her share her water with the enemy, because that was also what humans did. 3 weeks later, the grand amphitheater was full for the third time that year. Fuller, in fact, cadets stood in the aisles, sat on the steps, and clustered in the doorways. Faculty members lined the walls. The academy commandant herself sat in the front row. Professor Talshevek stood at the center, looking out at 2,000 faces. He was quiet for a long time. Previous iterations of this course, he began, taught that no sapient species could evolve on a death world. I told you this myself in this very room at the start of this year. I told you it was impossible. I told you the metabolic costs were prohibitive. I told you that death world civilizations were myths, ghost stories, and that you should dismiss them as such. He paused. I was wrong. The hall was perfectly silent. The universe does not produce Deathworlders despite their planets. It produces them because of their planets. Every earthquake, every ice age, every predator, every plague, every extinction event, these are not obstacles to intelligence. They are the forge, the fire that burns away everything except what is strong enough, stubborn enough, and compassionate enough to survive. He brought up the holographic image of Earth, blue and green and white, swirling with storms, shining in the dark. They did not survive by being the strongest. They are not. They did not survive by being the fastest. They are not. They survived by refusing to stop, by working together, by protecting each other, by running toward danger when every rational calculation said to run away. He looked toward the back of the amphitheater. Asha was there, arm in a sling, ribs wrapped, bruises still fatting from yellow to nothing. Rievik sat on her left, pressed close against her side. Dorvan sat on her right, his cracked armor still showing the marks of the battle he had chosen to fight. Pilvath sat in front of them, and Yen 3 stood in the aisle nearby, their sensors focused on the professor. Asha caught Talshevek's eye and gave him a small, tired wave with her good hand. He smiled. It was the first time his students had ever seen him smile. I would like to formally revise the curriculum, he said. Deathworlders are not myths. They are not ghost stories. They are not cautionary tales. He straightened his translucent spine, and his voice filled the hall. They are cadets, and we are honored to serve beside them. The amphitheater erupted. 2,000 voices from 200 worlds, cheering, clicking, humming, vibrating, singing, every species expressing joy in its own way, all of it aimed at the back row, where a small human woman with broken ribs and a borrowed jacket sat with the 4 best friends she had ever made and cried. She cried because she was tired, and because her ribs hurt, and because 6 months ago she had raised her hand in this room and thought she had ruined everything. She had not ruined anything. She had changed everything. Rievik leaned against her shoulder. Are you okay? Asha wiped her eyes with the back of her good hand and laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful sound. Yeah, she said, I'm okay. And for the first time since she had arrived at the edge of known space, a lone human girl from a world the galaxy had been afraid to name, she meant it.